Hey everyone, this is Justin here, Tame Type 1. Today, I'd like to have a special topic about transitioning away from using a rapid acting insulin like Humalog or Novolog over to using R insulin for your meals. Because I've been getting a lot of feedback lately with the coaching I'm doing and everything else. A lot of people are asking me, all right, I'm on Humalog right now, I'm on Novolog right now. How do I start using R insulin instead? Because what happens is they notice that their rapid acting insulin that they're used to using for their high carb meals suddenly don't work as well for low carb meals. They find that they take their insulin, and if they don't take enough, they end up going high many hours later, or if they take too much, which is often the case, they end up going low and then still going high many hours later. The fact is, these rapid acting insulins just don't act fast enough for low carb meals. And I'm talking low carb as in very low carb, less than 10 grams in one sitting. And of course, this is because of protein. See, protein also raises your blood sugar, but the key thing is it does so very slowly, much slower than fat acting carbs. And consequently, the carbs you're getting on a very low carb diet are usually slow acting carbs from vegetables, leafy greens, and so on. And because of the fiber in those vegetables, those carbs are also digesting and also acting slower. You're dealing with slower carbs, but you're still using a rapid insulin for fast carbs, and it's just not working out right. The insulin's kicking in too fast, and it's through too fast, resulting in the food affecting you later on. So the key thing is using our insulin to deal with that, because our insulin is much slower than these rapid acting insulins, and it works a lot better for a low carb diet. Now you'll have to tinker with it for a little bit, but the general key point is that our insulin, once you figure it out, once you know how to use it, is much better. The issue, of course, is how do I get started with it? How do I transition away from what I'm using now to using our insulin? Because a lot of times we don't have the doctors on our side on this. We don't have them giving us the proper advice on how to do this. And I want to keep in mind, this isn't medical advice either. I'm not a doctor myself. But what I'm giving you is information on using our insulin based on my own experience, based on my own transition, and also from Dr. Bernstein's book, Diabetes Solution. In Dr. Bernstein's book, Diabetes Solution, Dr. Bernstein, by the way, he's been doing low carb for decades and decades and decades. He's the guru of type 1 diabetes and low carb. He talks about using our insulin too, and when it comes about starting it, he recommends starting with, for a 140-pound adult, 2 ounces of protein for every 1 unit of R. And 2 ounces of protein means by the total weight, not like just the protein, but the entire protein food. So 2 ounces of beef, you give 1 unit of R for it. 8 ounces of beef, you give 4 R for it. And this is for a 140-pound adult. Keep that weight in mind, because let's say your child is diabetic and you're trying to get him an R, and he weighs 70 pounds. Well, you're going to want to cut that our insulin in half for him. And likewise, if you're double that weight, if you're 280 pounds right now, you'll want to double that amount of insulin, because how big you are helps determine how much insulin you need. Now, this is just a starting guideline, because chances are this first dose isn't going to work for you because there's so many other factors at work other than your weight. But it's a good place to start. And that just brings me to my second point, along with starting our insulin, is you have to be willing to experiment. I've gone over this before, but I really want to hone in it when it comes to using our insulin, because you won't know what to do unless you're willing to tinker, unless you're willing to change, unless you're willing to up these doses up and down, change the timing and everything else until you get it just right. You have to treat diabetes like a never-ending experiment. I know some parents might be watching this, very concerned about their son or daughter who's a diabetic, and they're thinking, I don't want to experiment on my kid. That sounds harsh. That sounds cruel. But it's part of the process, and as long as you take it easy, as long as you take it slow, as long as you keep it slow and steady, your child will be just fine. Remember the law of small numbers. Small numbers mean small mistakes, and that applies here too. As long as you start small, as long as you keep the changes small, you take it up and down not by a lot, but by a little bit, then it's not going to do a lot of undue harm. And consider this as well. Let's say your child starts using our insulin and it ends up being too much. He ends up going low. Well, the problem with our insulin is that it works slowly, so if he's starting to go low, well, he's starting to go low again and again and again. That's going to be frustrating, I understand. But you can learn something from that. You learn that that dose of our insulin is too much. You take that and you learn for the next time. Take all of these hassles. Let's say your R insulin is too low and it goes high. Let's say it's too high and it goes low. You take all of these struggles with joy because you learn from all of them. You learn from all of these mistakes and all these experiments so that way you can find the right dose of R. And yeah, it's scary. It's scary to see yourself or scary to see your son or daughter going low or going high. You're trying to avoid that, right? I get that. I really understand that. But you need to remember that it's better for them to have a little bit of up and down in that transition and then make R work for them rather than to never go through that transition and stay high or stay low or stay on the roller coaster forever. It's going to do much more good in the long run for you to get through this transition now, for you to experiment now, and that way you'll be much better off later. You're going to find those flat lines and you're going to find much better blood sugars once you get through that pain. No pain, no gain, as they say, right? Well, you gotta deal with that pain. You gotta experiment. You gotta get through that rough transition where you're still working out your insulin dose before you find that sweet spot. And I promise, if you're willing to tinker, if you're willing to experiment, if you always look back and learn from your mistakes, log your numbers, log your dosing, log what you eat and everything else, keep those meals consistent. If you do all of that, you will learn from those mistakes and you will find that sweet spot. And those blood sugars will be better than ever. Now, I'll keep in mind, they're not always going to be perfect because things always change. Sometimes you need more insulin than you did a week ago. Sometimes you need less. But that is why you always need to keep diabetes as a constant experiment. Because things change, people change, puberty happens, summer happens, winter happens, all sorts of variables, stress, exercise, a million different things can change your dose. But as long as you can experiment, as long as you take the changes when you tinker the bolus up or down based on your experiment with joy, nice and steady, slow and steady wins the race, it'll be just fine. And let me give you an example of that. Let's say, for example, I eat my normal hamburger and eggs without a bun. And I notice that my normal dose is 2 units of R once before I eat and then once 2 hours later. I split my dose. You might have to try that as well, but you might not. You might want to change that timing. You want to make that dose work for you and experiment with those different things. But that's what I do. Let's say I notice that 4 hours after I eat, my blood sugar starts going up. Well, I can learn from that. What I would do if I saw that is I would do my 2 units of R before I ate, and then instead of trying 4 units afterwards and going way high, I'll try just 2.5, or maybe just even 2.25. Just change it up a little bit higher than before and see if that works. If I end up going low 4 hours later instead, I'll know that that was a little too big of a difference and I need to go in the in-between. You make those little changes, and what you do is eventually, slow and steady, with patience, taking all of those changes with joy and learning from all of them, you'll eventually get to that sweet spot. So just keep that in mind. Don't be afraid to experiment. Don't be afraid to make that change and get through that rough transition in order to find better blood sugars for the long term. It is totally worth it. And the thing is, once you do, yeah, it's a little hard getting there, but once you do, your blood sugar management is going to be so much easier. It's going to be a lot less worry because you're going to be confident that your numbers are staying level, even if you're not looking at them, even if you don't have a CGM. I don't have a CGM. I'm not looking at my blood sugars most of the time unless I'm checking them. But I know I'm confident that my blood sugars are fine. And they're not always perfect. Like I've said, things happen. But even on those not perfect days, my blood sugars never shoot up to 200 or shoot down to 50 or anything like that. They're still in a tight enough range to where it's not a big deal, it's easy to manage, and that's only happened through experimenting with the dosage, experimenting with the timing of that dosage, experimenting with the food, and keeping all of the other variables like my meals consistent until I figure out what works. So when it comes to transition to R insulin, try that. Keep your meals consistent, same weight, same food, for dinner one day to the next and for lunch one day to the next. Or maybe even breakfast one day to the next if you eat 3 meals a day. Same with snacks. Keep that consistent. Tinker that dose up and down very slowly until you get it just right. Change the timing if you need to. And eventually, with enough work, with enough effort, and with enough experimenting, you'll get there too. That is all, everyone. Keep taming that type 1. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. Don't be afraid to experiment. It is a part of achieving better results. Stay crazy, everyone. Stay cool.